So thank you for opening this conference. And on behalf of the EIPPEE partners, I would like to welcome you also. My name is Camilla Dyssegaard, and I am an associate professor here at the university, but also head of the Danish Clearinghouse for Educational Research. What is very important for us at this conference is we have tried to, because one thing is talking about getting evidence back to schools, working evidence-based in schools. And the intention of this conference is we would also like to get you into play and a discussion about what can we do together, how can we learn from the different sessions we're going to have during the next 2 days. So the keynotes we've done that there will be 2 presentations in all the keynotes, and then there will be a chair, so the last half hour will be a discussion and a debate with you and the presenters, so we all can take new knowledge with us, hopefully when the conference ends. So the first session here has the title, What Promotes Effective Implementation of Evidence in Schools? I will be the first presenter, and I will tell you about my project in a little bit. Afterwards, I will be followed by Professor David Goh and lecturer Janice Tripney, who will do a presentation of the results of the project, The Science of Using Science, Researching the Use of Research Evidence in Decision-Making. So, I will start now, and I will tell you about a project we're working on in Clearinghouse about what enables effective implementation of externally produced evidence in schools. I would also like you to take into consideration that the results I'll be showing and sharing with you today are preliminary. We're still working on it, so we cannot say it is definitely this way the analysis will end, but we're good on our way. So, the project was commissioned by the Ministry of Children Education and Gender Equality, and is twofolded. So, we have a state of the field of 10 countries where we've been out talking to different people in ministries to see how they were working with promoting evidence-based teaching. And then we have a state of the evidence, which is a full systematic review we're working on, and where we right now at the current time are working with 6 different themes. But to start with the state of the evidence, the countries, we have 10 different countries: Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, England, Scotland, Ontario, Canada, Maryland, USA, New South Wales, and finally New Zealand. So what we have done is we've started by doing a systematic information search where we've been looking at policy documents, ministry homepages, etc., to find out, are there any specific goals in the policy documents talking about how are we working with promoting the use of evidence? And then we've done qualitative interviews with key informants. So, the areas of interest we've had here are policies and strategies for use of research findings in schools. Economy, is this something that is supported by the ministries? Research dissemination, how are we working with doing this? Requirements, expectations directed as teachers, are there any official policies on how teachers have to work with this? Initiatives that support knowledge exchange. Use of research in teacher education and further training of teachers, and experience with knowledge mobilizations. So, right now what we generally see in the countries is all countries have had recent reforms of their schools, so we're talking about major national reforms that they're working with. All countries have some form of national curriculum, but it varies how fixed they are or not, if it's just recommendations or if they're actually specific requirements to what we're working with. In most countries, teacher education programs are placed at universities. All countries but one have national tests where the children are tested regularly to see how they're progressing. All countries have organizations that disseminate knowledges, clearinghouses, or what it may be. 6 countries demand certification of teachers. 6 countries have requirements for continuing professional development. And finally, 6 countries have mandatory introduction periods where teachers they either have a mentor where they're following a more experienced teacher, or they have a lot of also where they're being observed during their lessons and getting feedback also from more experienced teachers. I would also like to say to you that the slides here we will put onto our homepage in Clearinghouse, but also on the EIPPEE network, so you will be able to see them later on. So this is just to give you a picture of initial teacher training. Where is it taking place? And you can see there's only one country, which is Denmark, but there's only one place you can actually get a teacher education. And it's also very varied, where it's a qualification. You have to be certified to be a teacher, or where you have an introduction period. So one of the things we also see, which is very interesting, this is about the attitudes and culture change. And what we can see sort of common for all countries, teachers are described as being stressed on time. And even places where they have a fixed curriculum, the teachers feel that time is a problem. They're stressed on curriculum. And this is also specifically in countries where there is a more fixed curriculum. Do I have time to read more evidence-based, looking at research, or getting more courses? They're stressed regarding to preparation. Do they have time to look at other things besides what they're teaching in their classes? And they're challenged in seeing the relevance of research results in their practice, because it's going pretty well. I know what I'm doing. Why should I use time on gaining new knowledge? And also if it's accessible and understandable, the research. Looking further, there are also quite a few differences between the 10 countries. The autonomy of teachers vary very much, how much they decide themselves in what they're doing in the classrooms, how they're doing it, which methods they're using, and again, is it a fixed curriculum? Here we have it, the guidelines for the curriculum, and almost fixed curriculum. Also, the respect for teachers vary, and this is something we can see in the international research. You also see this is quite an important point, also saying how much prestige is there around the teaching profession. And assessment practices, use of tests and data vary very much. So even I said it's only one country that doesn't have national tests, we can also see it's very different and varies very much how much assessment is actually used in the classes and by the teachers. If we're looking at continued professional development, this is also a very interesting point in these interviews also is this something that is legally required? In Denmark, we have none. In Sweden, there are none. In Norway, there are none. Finland, they require 3 days per year. England, there are none. Scotland, they have legal requirements of 35 hours a year career-long professional learning. This is quite a lot. Sorry. In Ontario, they have an appraisal every 5 years where they require professional development, and they also require, in some extent, that you're working with evidence-based research. Maryland, all teachers must pursue professional development continually. New South Wales, they have a legal requirement of minimum 100 years of professional development every 3 years. And I can tell you, many Danish teachers would envy this very much. New Zealand, they have a legal requirement to participate in professional development, a minimum every 3 years. So you can see it varies very much across the countries how much is actually going on, which is also, of course, an important point to take into consideration, saying this, of course, also influences the teacher's possibilities to actually work evidence-based. So this was the introduction to the state of the field we're working on. And what is interesting, and I said, a lot of the points we've been hearing from the different ministries also are something we're seeing in the international studies also we're working with. So our review question for our review sounds like this. How can empirical research in the field be characterized in regard to origin, frequency, purpose, approach, research design, results, and research quality? What promotes and/or hinders the implementation of research-based knowledge and knowledge implementation in primary and lower secondary school? So what we're interested here is seeing what is the research telling us about what does it take to implement something evidence-based in school? What does it take to get the teachers actually to work with this? What can we learn from the research on how to do it? So we've been through about almost about 10,000 studies, and right now we're working with 33 that are included in the final review. So right now, and as I say, this is the primary analysis we're working on, but what we're seeing here is we have 6 themes. The first one is fidelity, and fidelity is about looking at, are the teachers actually doing what they're supposed to in implementation? I can give you an example. If we're working with a reading intervention that requires 20 minutes reading every day by the students, are they actually doing this? Theme 2, we can see also across, is professional development. How much time is given to the teachers to actually evolve their practices? Theme 3, implementers, facilitators. So are there people who are actually supporting the teachers in working with the interventions they're trying to implement? Theme 4, personal attitudes and culture change. And the personal attitudes are also the teachers. Are they actually interested in working with these new interventions? And then we have the next theme, principal leadership engagement. How much are the school heads, or all of the heads of the schools, actually working to promote the implementation? And finally, theme 6, sustainability and life cycles. Also saying, how long is the intervention actually working, and is it possible to keep it going in the school also after the implementation process? And as you can see, this is interesting because there are a lot of things crossing over with the state of the field. So, to give you some examples, Theme 1, fidelity. We have 19 studies included here, and in a little bit you'll say, goodness, this woman, she cannot do math. But several of the studies are in several themes. So it's not that you will in a little bit see we have quite more than 33 studies, but they cross over. So one of the things we can see, relevant background knowledge. Do we actually know what we're doing and why we're doing it? Are the teachers actually prepared to what they have to do? Again, the instruction should be followed adequately, like the example I gave you. Are they actually reading the 20 minutes a day? Teachers have to believe the intervention has a positive effect, and you can say, well, of course, because we don't believe what we're doing, it's very hard to implement. And a new curriculum that is intangible and non-prescriptive is difficult to implement. I know that the Danish participants here will know we just had a new school reform in Denmark, and one of the things that is very difficult for Danish teachers is also to quite understand what is expected of them when they, for example, have to do a varied teaching. How do I do that, and what is actually meant by it? High implementation scores and unqualified staff. See, this is interesting. Because what we can see is one of the places in the schools where the staff are less qualified is actually where the implementation rates are really very good of interventions. But then again, maybe this isn't so surprising, because if you're a teacher that is not qualified, perhaps doesn't have a teacher background, you're of course more motivated also to say, I want some interventions that actually work. Can you help me in how do I prepare for my teaching? And implementation fidelity has vital significance for the effect of a given intervention. Again, are we actually doing what is expected of us? And if we're not, it's not working as well. And finally, also the lack of measures of student improvement. Again, are we not doing assessment of the children and looking at, are they actually learning more, and is this improving my teaching? Well, then the implementation rate isn't that great either. So theme 2, professional development. We have 17 studies that are included under this theme. And these are just to give you some examples of how they're working with different things in the studies here. We have an example of 5 3-hour collaborative seminars over a period of 3 months. So we can see that the teachers are actually, while they're implementing their interventions, are actually also being supported regularly. Introductory training and 7 monthly skills sessions and coaching. Intervention specifically targeted teacher skills in handling children with behavioral problems. Content and pedagogical focus courses, and long-term collaboration with universities. So what we can see here is that the professional development of the teachers continually during implementation has a massive effect on how well we're actually implementing the given interventions. Theme 3, implementers and facilitators. So we have 15 studies that are included under this theme. Team collaboration, and this is very interesting because this is also something we're hearing across the state of the field. Collaborating in teams, but also collaborating with consultants, etc. But also collaborative inquiry is something we're seeing quite a lot across the countries, where teachers are actually meeting, if they're meeting online, or actually physically present, but where they're exchanging also their experience of how, what they're working now, what has been a success and not, and they're learning from each other. Coaching also, where you regularly have an expert going to the schools and giving the teachers feedback on how they're doing. Teachers and psychologists, and this is very interesting. We have studies that look at what is the difference between a teacher implementing an intervention and a psychologist. And what is interesting to be learned from this is that actually we can see the teachers are actually better at doing it because they know the children best. But again, it also requires that they're well equipped to do it. Trained behavioral coaches, again, an intervention direct targeted at helping children with behavioral difficulties, that the teachers are actually trained in how do I work with these children. And instructional consultant teams, again, that we have coaches at the schools also who are helping the teachers in implementing the different interventions. And research assistants also at the schools. This is also about action research, how they're working out in the school, and if they're also using researchers and research assistants to help them. And different and varied kind of specialists. What is going to be interesting here, and we haven't gotten that far in the analysis yet, but that is also looking at the different interventions and how they're being implemented. If they're school-wide interventions or if they're based in the classroom, what the differences are there and what it actually takes. So, theme 4, personal attitudes and culture change. We have 15 studies here. Clear communication and understanding of the mission. And this is something that's been discussed quite a lot, but that the teachers also have an understanding for and an acceptance of why we're actually doing what we're doing, why we're actually going to implement this intervention. And it's also a question of many decisions are made top down, but also then turning it around and getting it bottom up and saying to getting the teachers also to participate in saying this is actually important. This is this is a priority at our school, and we actually want to work with this, and we also feel that this is part of what we're working towards. Then we have the high teacher turnover, which limits the prevalence rate, and this is of course true because if you have a lot of teachers changing and new teachers coming, it's difficult also to get the intervention over to them. Teachers' ability or willingness to implement the project, again, are they actually interested in doing this? Do they have an understanding for it? Do they feel that this is part of their job? Individual differences between teachers' acceptance. Again, also, is this a joint teaching staff who are actually agreeing on this is what we're working toward, or does it vary from class to class? Teachers' engagement in interventions directly affects students. Again, are they showing the students this is something important, this is a priority, this is what we're working towards? Again, teachers are committed to the intervention. As I said, a bottom-up process. Again, have we given the teachers a real understanding of why we're actually doing what we're doing? And finally, threat towards teachers' autonomy is also something we're seeing, again, saying you're taking my freedom of my teaching and my experience. I know what I'm doing in my class, and I will not be dictated. And finally, again, and also we see this a lot, teachers' workload and lack of time. So this is one of the things we also are very interested in looking at, also these countries that are working more with or giving teachers time to actually learn how to use the different evidence-based research, make it accessible to them, and are they actually using it more if there is given time to them. And theme 5, principal leadership engagement. We have 11 studies here. So we have knowledge of curriculum, instruction, and assessment, academic support. And this is very interesting because we can see this in several studies, that if heads of schools or all of the school head teams actually know what is required of the teachers, not in the way saying that the heads of schools have to go down and teach the children Danish, but they have to know this intervention, what does it imply? What does it imply of my teachers? What are they doing in their classes? And we can see in these studies that that actually has a direct effect on the implementation, that the heads of schools not only are engaged and maybe promoting this intervention, but actually know what it requires of the teachers in the classroom. Flexibility and optimizers, personal support. Again, this is also something we can see that if the heads of schools are supporting their teacher and also giving them something to optimize and say, this is going very well. It might be slow, it might be difficult, but you're actually improving and we're moving the right way. Trust and shared leadership. Again, that the teacher or the heads of schools are showing the teachers that they actually have faith in, they're doing what is expected of them, and also that they themselves also are in and looking at, am I actually succeeding, and maybe also observing each other. Principles as an active part of intervention implementation, especially at the start, again, that the heads of schools are taking the first steps and showing that this is the way we want to move at the school. Principals that work on continuous development of their school based on data analysis, goal setting, and achievement monitoring have positive effects on implementation. Again, that the schools are actually following the processes of the teachers and actually monitoring, is this actually working as we expected, or do we need to go back and maybe work with another implementation strategy? And finally, not surprising at all, changing principles affect the implementation adversely. If there's a change of the heads of schools during an implementation process, this of course gives quite a lot of problems also, especially to the fidelity. Yes, and finally, theme 6, sustainability and life cycles. We have 6 studies that are included under this theme. Sticking with the principles of the project in spite of problems faced along the way. And this is something we see in a lot of the studies, saying it's difficult, it's time-taking, it can be expensive, but actually continuing the implementation process still. Continued growth of new programs, and this is something we also see has a lot effect on the teachers, that they feel that they are constantly being approached with new approaches on how to do things. First they learn to do the one model, and now it's the next model. And a lot of interesting things can be found on this, because we can also say, well, maybe there's a good reason that we were working with this model, and this is actually, the next intervention is actually continuing on what we have been working on, but building on top of it. But it can also be totally new expectations, among other things, because of exactly school reforms or changing governments that have different expectations. And then we also see, interesting enough, that there's a regression occurring in the second year. So interventions that take several years to implement, we can see after the first year, then in the second year, in some of the studies we're seeing that that's when the lapses start, and when the heads of schools and maybe the teachers also are not as focused on the implementation. And this one, I'm sure many of you would recognize. After end of funding, interventions are given up. So we might have a high state implementation theory saying this is what we're working towards, giving thousands of millions or whatever to some intervention, working with it and saying this is a 3-year program, and when it's done, well, the schools stop working that way. Alignment of program characteristics with ongoing strategies, school policies, and other programs. Again, also, are these interventions actually working with what is expected of the teachers, both regarding law, but also of the different policies at the schools and what the expectations are there? And finally, continued effort should be made to keep the interest in the program. So also we're seeing after a period of time, there's a lapse in interest of actually implementing the intervention, because we have a high focus on it in the beginning, and it's really continuous work to make sure that we can see that we're continuing to look at this and working with the implementation strategies. And interesting enough also, the reason we've called this life cycles is we can see, and also in the theoretical background for implementation studies, that it seems that interventions have a lifespan and then a new intervention takes over. So this is what I actually had to tell you about, and as I say, this is our primary analysis, but quite interesting and a lot we have to work further with. But the interesting part also being is that the state of the field and actually the evidence we're looking, it works pretty well together because it's the same things we're seeing. So with that, I would like to say thank you for your attention.